Welcome to Through a Glass Darkly Radio. This is the first inaugural episode, and you are listening to United Public Radio worldwide. The intro song, I just want to give credit where credit is due. You had Rammstein by Rammstein, and then you had Mark of the Doomslayer by Carl Casey at White Bat Audio. So I appreciate that. Now, I haven't really said much about what the purpose of this radio channel is going to be all about, or this show is going to be about. So this is based on Through a Glass Darkly, which you can find on YouTube below. Through a Glass Darkly with Sean, but this is Through a Glass Darkly Radio with Sean Patrick Hazlett, your esteemed host here, and as I'm talking live now. What the purpose of this, or what I'm going to cover, sometimes I'll do news, sometimes I'll talk about current events, but I will always talk about the paranormal or things that people don't acknowledge exist, but the government does, like remote viewing and UAPs and all that good stuff. And I will sometimes interview folks on this video. So on this on this radio show. So I am very honored to present our very first guest, the esteemed and well-known Dr. John Brandenburg. And before I have him on, I just want to read you a bit of his bio. So Dr. John Brandenburg, PhD, is a plasma physicist. He did his graduate work in California at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in controlled plasma for fusion power, and has worked in defense, energy, and space research. Dr. Brandenburg was also part of the Clementine mission to the moon, which discovered water at the moon's poles. However, the focus of Brandenburg's scientific career has been to complete the great effort of Einstein to unify the two long-range forces of nature, gravity, and electromagnetism. So, without further ado, welcome, John. How you doing, my friend?
Oh, it's Sean. It's great to see you, and it is a great honor to be on your show. Pleasure. And in addition, and especially this is your first show, and live long and prosper in this show. I view your show as important to helping to end what I call the ET cover-up, leading to ET disclosure.
Well, it's a long and sordid history, and half of it is misinformation. The other half, portion of it is disinformation. And then there's some truth somewhere in there. What is the truth? I don't know.
Well,
but
historically speaking,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you. No, speaking historically, that's how the human race does these things. I'm sorry.
Yeah, fair enough. You kind of avoid the truth as long as you possibly can. All right, so today, folks who've watched my channel on YouTube, we've covered this, but I think given the broadened reach of the kind of there's a broader audience out there that I think would be fascinated with this story. So we're going to talk a little bit about the ghosts of Mars, and I don't mean actual physical ghosts. I mean there's something that there was probably a civilization there, and B, something really creepy happened to may have happened to that civilization based on the chemical composition.
Happened, yes. We don't,
as we'll discuss.
Yes,
and it's pretty interesting. It may have happened a very, very long time ago, but it also suggests that we don't necessarily live in a nice and cuddly universe all the time. I'm sure there are nice and cuddly folks out there, but there's some other
one of these days we'll meet some of them.
All right, so with that, let's at least start with the premise of, was there life on Mars, and what's the evidence to support it, and what's kind of the evidence to suggest that there was not any life?
Well, to give you kind of the big picture, which is what I would like to mention, at least in to give a context to this. The big picture is we are in the universe, and we are not alone. I mean, every scientific evidence suggests that planets like Earth and the chemicals that make up our bodies that give us life are to be found elsewhere in the universe. They've discovered like 5,000 extrasolar planets, and many of them are similar to Earth, and some of them are even in the same kind of comfort zone of where you have liquid water on their surfaces. So Earth-like planets are to be found everywhere. So are the chemicals of life. So there is no reason as a scientist to not believe that other life, biospheres, Earth-like biospheres, and intelligent species do exist in the universe. And since we're fairly recent in the universe, that means there's probably cultures out there that have been around for a long, long time, preceding us, and are far more advanced in space travel and things like this. This is all just a very simple scientific extrapolation of our situation. I mean, we've developed space travel. We've been to the moon. We could go to Mars anytime we put our minds to it. Other people have obviously figured out how to do this too. So as it turns out, it looks like we had two Earth-like planets in this solar system. One was Earth, of course, and the other was Mars. Mm-hmm. Mars had an ocean, and that ocean, the bed of that ocean lies on the northern young part of Mars. The way they get the relative ages of terrains on Mars, you count the number of craters. Like the moon, you can see there are areas that have been flooded with lava, and they don't have as many craters as the highlands, which has lots of craters. That means those highlands have been around since the moon formed. The same is on, you can extrapolate that to Mars, with the added detail that Mars is next to the asteroid belt, which is a source of, so we would expect more meteorites to hit Mars per year in certain size ranges than would hit the moon or Earth. So basically, we have a planet that was apparently quite Earth-like for most of its planetary history. It had a northern ocean. I was the first person to give a paper on this ocean in a modern scientific forum back in 1986. And you can look that up on the Mars Ocean Theory on Wikipedia. I'm reference number 1. However, I never get credit for it. It's like Brandenburg who, because of things I'm going to discuss, I'm considered radioactive on Mars because I extrapolate from that.
Because you said Mars was radioactive,
Mars was
basically.
Well, that's part of it, yes, and it is partly radioactive. But what apparently Mars was like Earth until some terrible event happened fairly recently in geologic time. We're talking about something before the dinosaurs happened on Earth, but still in geologic time. That's fairly recent. The Earth's been around for 4.5 billion years old, 4.5 billion. The dinosaurs are only a couple 100 million years ago. This was about probably 500 million years ago. So something on Mars happened to change Mars from being an Earth-like planet with an ocean and Earth-like, it apparently had an oxygen atmosphere. That's why if you look at pictures of Earth from space, the desert areas are all bright red. That's because the oxygen in the Earth's atmosphere oxidizes the iron in the soil into hematite, same color as our blood is for the same reason as oxidized iron. And so Mars apparently had an oxygen atmosphere. It had an ocean, and that means they had to have temperatures and atmospheric pressure similar to Earth. So it's a second Earth.
Now, John, how do you know they had an ocean? What was the chemical signature that indicated that there may have been an ocean there?
Well, they basically measured. They did a very complex analysis. They looked at Mars is covered with water channels, places where apparently rivers formed and flowed. You have basically science fiction looking landscapes where you have craters like on the moon, but the craters were once lakes and they actually have rivers leading out to them, leading down to where apparently the ocean shoreline was, and those have deltas on them. So those rivers flowed for a long time. So I merely found it because the estimates of how much water was on Mars were enough to cover the entire surface of Mars to about half a kilometer depth. And if you move that up to like 1/4 of the Martian surface area, then you get an ocean several kilometers deep in the northern low part of Mars. And you can see where the ocean shoreline was because you have a lot of craters on these old landscapes. And then suddenly all the craters get wiped out as if they turned to mud and were wiped out because there was an ocean sitting there. And so it's a rather science fiction-y looking landscape where you have craters like the moon and lakes in them and rivers flowing around them. And so I mean, we have that on Earth. We have Hudson's Bay, for instance. It is a big meteor crater, as it turns out, and it's full of water now. But so we had an ocean. We had a planet that was very much like Earth. Apparently had an oxygen atmosphere. It had a CO2 greenhouse, giving it warm temperatures like Earth, even though it was farther from the sun. So water could flow freely on its surface and wouldn't evaporate. And apparently this lasted a long time, which leads to the immediate question, well, was there life on Mars? Yes, apparently there was life on Mars. In fact, the Viking landing experiments, which were done half a century ago, they landed on Mars, they tested the soil for life, and they got weird chemistry, they called it. By the rules that they'd adopted before they landed on Mars, they actually had found life. But NASA apparently vetoed that verdict and said, oh no, it was weird chemistry of some sort. You'll notice now they've landed like 5 times on Mars since then. Have they tested for life again using more advanced technologies? No, they haven't. That's because
I think they
know what the answer will be.
I think they had some sort of meteor that they had discovered. I don't know if it was while they were exploring Mars or something they had on there.
ALH 8401.
But they introduced about half the sample to water, right? And like we have microorganisms that are up in the Arctic, right? That are kind of use hydrogen peroxide. If you introduce water into something like that, you'll kill an organism like that. So half the organisms that they introduced, the organisms that they introduced were the the possible organisms that
they killed them.
Yeah, they killed them. Yeah, they killed them with water if they were indeed organisms. And then the other half, they declared it inconclusive. Yeah.
They declared it inconclusive. There's an acronym I heard recently from my brother. He worked for Hewlett Packard, and it says NAC, which means not altogether clear. NAC. So, however, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that if you go next door to a planet that used to be Earth-like and you find life there or signs of past life, if life was on Mars, then it's in the stars, because there's nothing. If you had life on 2 planets in the same solar system, then that means life is a very common phenomenon. And now, how long did that life flourish on Mars? Apparently a long time. And that's why we find what looks at at least two sites, signs of archaeology. It's eroded, it's beat up, but of course, we're talking about Mars that's been in a deep freeze for about 500 million years and lost most of its atmosphere in this catastrophe that occurred. But you have the face at Cydonia, the big Mars face. And then next door to it, within 10 kilometers, 10 clicks, is a pyramid. And NASA never
That's the
shows
DNM.
the
That's the
picture
DNM
showing
pyramid, right?
that's the DNM, the
Yeah.
Petro and Molinar pyramid.
Now,
NASA
didn't they
never
try to?
shows
Didn't
the
NASA
face in the
try
pyramid in
to,
the
or
same
the
picture.
didn't the European Space Agency and either them or NASA or both tried to debunk the face on Sidonia Mense?
Yes.
And just a
Yes.
little bit, like what did they do to? Okay, I just want people to have the whole story so that they can kind of make their own decision.
Well, okay. The story is in 1976, they took 2 pictures of the Sidonia face. In fact, the cover up began immediately because they took one picture and they said, "Oh my God, it looks like a face." They also apparently found the pyramid in an adjoining frame of the swath of pictures. So they said, "Oh, it was a trick of light and shadow. We took another picture, a few hours later, and it was gone." No, it was dark. They were taking pictures at sunset to get the maximum shadow length, so you could, get the maximum relief of the landscape. What they did is they waited 30 days till everyone had forgotten about it. Then they brought the spacecraft again over there again, and they took another picture showing the face, this time at a different time of day. And they also took 2 more images of the DNM pyramid. So and it's a 5-sided pyramid. You can look it up on the net. And so then they had these pictures. And I'm going to harken back to the big picture again. Imagine you have a government that's already aware that we're not alone in the universe and is keeping that quiet. Let's say something like Roswell happened. The government knows we're not alone. They know that not everybody out there is nice. They also know that. Some of them are nice, some of them are not so nice. So they decide to cover that up, and then you find remains of a dead civilization on Mars. What do? You cover that up too. So that's why I now call it the ET cover up. It's not just the UFO cover up. They have a cover. They're trying to maintain a cover up on Mars at the same time. They're fighting a war on 2 fronts. Just ask the Germans in World War II.
Isn't there
what that's like?
Some evidence of life on Mars now as well, based on the methane cycle?
Oh, yes, there is. Mars is a rather lunar-like place. I mean, there's barely enough air to allow liquid water to form at some of the lower elevations, at least temporarily. Temperatures are so low that liquid water would probably freeze unless it was full of salt. So what they've done, though, is they found, and they always refer to these things as puzzling and as a mystery. They found out that they had predicted the atmosphere of Mars would be, mostly CO2, and then they measured some nitrogen. Okay, they expected that. Then they expected there would be carbon monoxide formed by ultraviolet breaking up CO2, and then a very tiny trace of oxygen. Instead, the 3rd most abundant element, gas in the, it's the 4th most abundant. There's argon, which is what we put in light bulbs. It's part of our own atmosphere.
Just remember that one.
They found
remember that element. We'll
the
get
4th
back to
most
that.
abundant. Argon, right. Yes, the 4th most abundant element in the Mars atmosphere is oxygen. And it's molecular oxygen. It's not atomic oxygen. It's not produced by ultraviolet or something like this. This is regular molecular oxygen like we breathe on Earth. In fact, if you were really smart, you could figure out how to strain out that oxygen from the Mars atmosphere as it exists now and have all the oxygen you needed. If you had you'd basically be pulling in a lot of air for like a colony, just straining out the oxygen and putting back out the CO2 into the atmosphere again. And what they found also is that in the spring and summer on Mars, the oxygen levels go up. And then in the winter, they go down, local winter. And then they also found methane, which is it's swamp gas. It means bacteria breaking down fossil organic matter. And they found that would go up too in the summer and decline in the winter. So Mars is breathing.
What was their explanation for that? Because they always have some egghead like non-life explanation.
They have no explanation, Sean. They have no explanation. They say it's puzzling. It's puzzling. I look at it and I said, well, there's obviously a very small remnant biosphere on Mars of microbes. And the other, I grew up in Oregon, where if you go to the coast and seaweed washes up on the shore, this is Oregon, it's kind of far north, and the seaweed that would wash up was red. It wasn't green. And it's red because the seaweed tended to grow like 10 feet down in the water. It was called kelp. Everything was called kelp in those days. And as it turns out, chlorophyll rejects green light, which is where the sun actually puts out most of its light, is green.
Right. It's the colors that what it reflects. It's not what it is. Right.
Yeah, that's right. Chlorophyll reflects green light, and actually that's the most abundant part of the solar spectrum. So if you're starved for light, you adjust your chlorophyll so it's red. So the most energetic photons that help with photosynthesis are green and blue. So you reject the red and you concentrate on green and blue, and that means you can have good photosynthesis even 10 feet down in the ocean, because ocean water passes blue and green light fairly well and not red. So when we look out on these sweeping vistas of Mars and we see all this red stuff, we could be looking at plant life clinging to all the rocks and we wouldn't recognize it. I mean, of course,
it could be
red
lichen
iron,
or
oxidized iron,
or
hematite. But red lichen would be there and we wouldn't even.
Right.
In fact, if you don't want to be eaten, if you're a piece of lichen and don't want to be eaten by something on a Mars rock, you make yourself red as camouflage, basically. So we have abundant evidence that there's life on Mars even now. However, if there's life on Mars, there's life in the stars. As a character in one of my science fiction novels about the UFO cover-up reports to this glamorous news anchor he's explaining the UFO cover-up, and she says, well, why is there a Mars cover-up? And he says, because the Mars bone is connected to the UFO bone. The Mars bone goes, the UFO bone goes. And he says, and if the UFO bone goes, the head of this government will fall off. Because it'll come out, the government was covering this thing up for that so long. So as a cautionary member, as a cautionary measure, they just squelched any talk about archaeology on Mars, and they said, oh, the face on Mars is just a trick of light and shadow. They didn't talk about the pyramid at all. I was at a scientific conference where they released the first new pictures of the pyramid. I'm sitting there in a scientific with 1,000 other scientists, and this guy gets up and says, oh, here's a new picture of the pyramid of Mars next to the face. And you could just tell there was just this indrawing of breath, because it's obviously a pyramid. It looks like brickwork, and everyone knew it. And so it's but these people are all dependent on NASA for grants, and you got to play ball. If you're a scientist at a university, your entire career depends on how much grant money you can bring in. So if somebody at NASA, you start asking questions, well, what about this pyramid next to it? You got a face and then you got a pyramid next to it. The NASA guy will simply say, you've gotten a lot of grants from us already. If you go asking questions like that, you're going to be on shaky ground here. You might not get any more grants. And that's enough. That's enough to, so academic freedom doesn't exist in this country anymore because everybody's dependent on grant money. And that means the government can basically squelch all debate on subjects it is uncomfortable with. And that's what they've done.
And by the way, the face at Sidonia is not the only alleged
No,
face.
it is not.
You have a story about
There's another site. There's another site halfway around the planet in a place near a place called Utopia, plain of Utopia, but it's on the edge of that. Utopia plain used to be part of the ocean bed, and at the shore of the ocean, just like Sidonia Mensa was at the shore where the ancient ocean was, shoreline. But there's another site that I discovered two more faces, and people can look them up, Utopia faces or Brandenburg faces. There are two of them, and one of them looks very similar to the face at Sidonia. They're about 2/3 the size. And they have the same detailed markings. They have an indentation over the left eye, a mark on the cheek, and of course they have nose, eyes, mouth. And when I discovered this, I let people at NASA know I discovered it. And I even got a phone call from Carl Sagan basically saying, why are you causing this trouble? I'm trying to get a joint Russian-US Mars mission going, and you're causing trouble. And I said, well, I'm just talking about what we found on Mars, just, like the pyramids of Elysium. You had that in your Cosmos series. He said, and I said, we found this another, at least one really good face that looks just like the one. He says, yes, I heard about that. Could you send me a picture of that? And so the location where this was found was then renamed. It had just been called kind of Utopia area. It was renamed Galaxis Chaos. So apparently I had thrown somebody's galaxy into chaos by finding these things, because he saw the pictures and so yeah, there's at least two archaeological sites, and there's probably several others on Mars where there are pyramid-shaped things, and there are carved faces like Giza. Actually, the faces more closely resemble the faces in Old Mexico done by the Olmecs, faces in helmets. And they even have the helmet visor, and then the side of the helmet forms a right angle. That is clearly seen in the pictures of Sidonia Mensa. And so there's
how big is that
objects on
the pyramid? Yeah.
Oh, it's like, well, it's the same size. It's almost the same size as the pyramids at Elysium, which were discussed by Carl Sagan in his historic show Cosmos. And they are about 3 kilometers on the side and 1 kilometer tall. They were apparently not built. They were apparently landforms that suggested pyramids, and then they were shaped by whoever lived there. It's a lot cheaper in terms of, you could build a lot bigger pyramid if you just take a mountain that looks like a pyramid and take a lot of soil and rock away and make this faces, and then face it with brick. There's a place even on the DNM pyramid where you can see where apparently brickwork has failed, and it looks like a little square doorway. Actually, it's a place where brickwork in a square area has just collapsed and slid down the side of the pyramid. So those details are there. The face on Mars, they took a new picture in 1998, and instead of taking it from directly above, like the original pictures, they took it from the side. And you can see, because there's a round crater, a nice round crater beside the face. And you can see in the new pictures they released that it's the crater is elliptical, meaning you're viewing it from the side. And when you look at it, you can see there's nostrils in the nose. But what they did is they released the picture without any enhancement. So it was the crummiest looking picture they'd ever released from Mars. it looked. We joked in the investigation team that we were part of. We called it the cat box picture, as a picture of something in a cat litter box. That's what it looked like. But when we enhanced it, you can see that it's got eyes, nose, mouth. It's got a pair of nostrils in the nose. So we showed that at a scientific meeting that was upcoming, and a scientist from JPL showed up at our session where we were presenting this stuff and attacked DePietro.
Mm-hmm.
He got in. DePietro asked him, technical questions like, "Why did you release a picture that was with no enhancement and stuff like this?" And the guy started screaming at him and raised his fist to attack him. I got in between. DePietro was angry with me. He says, "You should have let him hit me. Then I could have sued him." But he was a scrawny old man, gray beard. And here's DePietro from a tough Italian neighborhood in Baltimore. I grew up in a tough town in Oregon. And so anyway, I just told him, "Calm down, sir," and he walked away.
Right.
And
but there's a good reason somebody from JPL would not want to explore life on Mars, right?
Actually, the thing he cried out was, "Are you calling me a liar?" And DePietro just said, "Why didn't you, why didn't you enhance this picture, like everything else for Mars?" And the guy starts screaming at him, "Why are you calling me a liar? I'll deck you, by God." And DePietro just stood his ground. He didn't even blink, and so it was a very strange occurrence. And as the guy was walking away, I told Vince, I said, "Well, that means this thing isn't over, Vince. In fact, this thing has barely started."
Mm-hmm.
We couldn't ask for a better confirmation that we'd struck pay dirt. Now they've released many new pictures of the face at Cydonia, and also new pictures of the face, the pyramid. It looks like a pyramid. The face looks like a face, and it's got straight lines on the top of its helmet, and the sides of its helmet are straight and meet at a right angle with the visor.
Mm-hmm.
It's got nostrils in the nose, 2 eyes, nose, mouth. This is eroded archaeology. I mean, it's a little eroded, sure. You would expect it to be. But look at the Sphinx, old pictures of the Sphinx before they dressed it up for the tourists. It looked like hell. And including it was either the Turks or Napoleon shot its nose off with a cannon. But so we have at 2 sites abundant evidence that there was a humanoid civilization on Mars before
Mm-hmm.
it collapsed. The civilization looks like it was primitive. It does not look advanced. We see no evidence of airports. Yeah.
So is that just because of the discovery of pyramids and faces, or is that because is there a possibility that those things just survive because they're the hardiest, whereas if you had wooden huts and things like, or whatever, other buildings would have just been blown away with the test of time?
Sean, that's a very excellent point. God forbid if we had a nuclear war on this planet and everything, all the cities got destroyed, and after a few million years, the Sphinx and the pyramids of Giza would still be standing and be recognizable. But everything, all the trappings of modern civilization would have disappeared. So I will tell you, I do not know what the level of civilization was that the I call them Sidonians. Martian is such a kind of tired term. And so I say the Sidonians, it looks like it was a primitive civilization, but I don't know. And I don't know what happened there. I will then, the isotopes in the Martian atmosphere suggest a thermonuclear holocaust.
Yeah. So what happened? Like, what happened to this? If there was a civilization there, what happened to these people?
And I will tell you, I grew up in a rough town, and where got into brawls in high school, and I've worked with the military and in defense and intelligence uh, most of my career as a physicist. And so, as one person said, when your head is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Mhm.
I recognize the limitations of my own viewpoint. However, I can only connect the dots. I can only connect the dots, and the image, the way I connect the dots, it appears like it was an Earth-like planet with a humanoid civilization on it, and then somebody came along and dropped two hydrogen bombs as big as the Empire State Building on it in the north over the ocean, what would have been ocean, and just completely blew away the atmosphere of Mars. They didn't want to just destroy the civilization there. They wanted to utterly destroy the biosphere of Mars so Mars could never recover. This was this looks as if it was as much an act of destruction as an act of terror.
Mhm.
They wanted to impress somebody else in the stars just how tough they were. This is Genghis Khan making pyramids of heads at cities that resisted him, so the other cities would just surrender and not fight him. And so it looks like somebody made an example out of Mars, and it would be even more pathetic if the civilization on Mars was actually fairly primitive and didn't have its own space capabilities. Um, but that's the way it looked. The isotopes, when we're all aware that you can take C4, standard explosive, plastic explosive for the military, and you can, if
Mhm.
you're hard up for firewood, you can actually light it and burn it. And when you burn it, it gives off a certain set of chemicals that you could probably, you're not supposed to. Not supposed to smell the smoke because it'll give you hallucinations or something. But however, if you stick a detonator cap in the C4 and set it off like it's intended, it puts out a whole different set of chemicals when you do that. And the rapid combustion of by shock wave puts out a different set of chemicals than just burning it in the air. The same with nuclear reactions. A hydrogen bomb puts out a different set of nuclear isotopes than like a nuclear
Mhm.
reactor operating. And one of those that it produces, it's what's in fact it's called in physics, astrophysics, is called R process. R meaning rapid bombardment of elements by high energy neutrons, like in a supernova. There's
Mhm.
only two places known where R process events occur. That's in supernova explosions and hydrogen bomb explosions. And they
And we haven't
produce
had a
the
supernova,
physics.
you know, in 4 and a
Yeah.
half billion years, otherwise we wouldn't be around,
Yeah. There
basically.
was no supernova on Mars.
Right.
It was apparently a pair of thermonuclear explosions. And this blew the atmosphere of Mars off into space. Everything on Mars that was advanced life like us died, and you could try and survive underground for maybe a few weeks, and then you come out, and there'd be nothing to come out to. And
So
so,
how did you come to
this
this
is a
conclusion?
terrible thing to do. Well, actually, sort of by accident. I was working at. I went to. I spent 9.5 years at nuclear weapons labs. I spent six and a half
Mhm.
years. I spent 6.5 years at um, Lawrence Livermore National Lab, working on controlled fusion, and then I went to Sandia National Labs and worked primarily on directed energy weapons there. But we worked just down the hall from people who worked on nuclear weapons. And one conversation I had, I was interested in Mars. Um, and so I was Xeroxing a chart from a scientific Xenon has like 4 different stable isotopes.
Mm-hmm.
And 2 of them are very prominent. One is called Xenon 129, the other is called Xenon 132. And they're normally even on the Earth's atmosphere and every other place we've sampled in the solar system, they're even Steven. But on Mars, there's 2.5 times more Xenon 129. And as it turns out, that's a signature of our process. And I found this out, or what got me interested in this, investigating this in detail, was one of the nuclear weapons experts I was talking to, kind of by the coffee machine, said, let me look at one of those charts, because I'd mentioned this odd thing on Mars. And he looked at it and he looked up at me and said, somebody nuked him. That's what that means. So this was interpreted by him to be nuclear weapons signature. And I've since verified that it is the signature of what's called our process, which means either there was a big supernova on Mars, which we know didn't happen because it would have blown away the entire solar system, or there was a big hydrogen bomb. There are big hydrogen bomb detonations on Mars. They created this same pattern of isotopes where Xenon 129 dominates over 132. And so
that's a 2.5 to 1 ratio versus a 1 to 1 ratio. And that's a 2.5 to 1 ratio.
On Mars, it's 2.5, 2.5, and on Earth, it's 1 to 1. And every other major reservoir in the solar system, solar wind, the atmosphere of Jupiter, for instance, Earth, rocks we bring back from the moon, it's all Xenon 129 and Xenon 132 are balanced. But on Mars has 2.5 times more Xenon 129. So there was
is there any place on Earth like that?
After I couldn't find it in the open literature, but apparently after a nuclear test, I did find one sample of the Earth's atmosphere, and they didn't say so, but it was apparently done right after a nuclear weapons test, and there was a big elevation of Xenon 129, and so I basically started, I'm a scientist, so I started investigating this. By the way, I'd gotten interested in Mars because we'd gone through 2 nuclear crises when I was at Nuclear Weapons Labs, where, in fact, the final one was called Able Archer, 1983.
Yep.
And it was a NATO exercise, and we came this close to a nuclear war, only it was all secret, except people at the lab where I worked, we knew. And the nuclear winter stuff had just been published by Carl Sagan, and then we had this nuclear crisis that was secret. And only people with security clearances like us could even listen to the rumors. And that meant morale at the lab collapsed. Everybody was in despair. They said, my office mate, who was normally a happy-go-lucky guy, he turns to me one day after this nuclear winter and the Able Archer 83 crisis. He says, I used to think if there was going to be a nuclear war, I'd run out, get in my car, race home, get my wife and kids, and take them into the hills, before Albuquerque and Sandia Labs got hit by 10 nuclear weapons, which we believed it would happen. And
there's that huge nuclear weapons complex around there. It's like Manzano. I don't know what
Manzano Mountain. It was out in the wilderness, out in the desert, and they supposedly stored thousands of nuclear warheads, mostly tactical. But I watched them actually. I watched a truck convoy, heavily guarded with armored cars and troops with M16s, go into that mountain, and it was just like in a movie. I mean, I'm sitting there watching this caravan go by. We'd gone out to look at the solar power tower out in the desert nearby and got blocked because of this convoy. And so these trucks was with objects covered with blue tarpaulin on the back, but one place the tarpaulin had come loose. And so the wind hit it and peeled it back. And there were bombs, complete with fins. So they were taking hydrogen bombs into this mountain for storage. And so my office mate says to me, I used to think I was going to run home, get my wife and kids, and take them to the hills. He says, now I'm just going to get up on the rooftop with a 6-pack of beer, watch the whole thing go. And he was normally a happy-go-lucky kind of character. And I didn't know what to say. I just finally said, Malcolm, his name's Malcolm. I said, Malcolm, what kind of beer would you be drinking, do you think? And that made him laugh. But the results of the nuclear winter study were that more people would die of starvation and cold after a nuclear war than would actually die in the initial attack. And so I had myself decided that if there was going to be a nuclear war, I was going to get a cup of coffee and go out and stand in the parking lot. Why even try to go home? I would have to cross half the city and everybody would be in a panic. I wouldn't ever able to get home.
Well, as long as you were in the blast radius, you would just be vaporized and wouldn't have to worry about it.
Yeah, it was right. It would be very, very quick. And so morale at the lab collapsed.
Mm-hmm.
People were in despair. That speech of, I used to think if there was a nuclear war, I was going to race home and get my wife and kids and do something. And then they would always have like, I'm going to take them for a picnic down by the Rio Grande River, something like that. So morale had collapsed at the lab during this period. And then it was Christmas break. And I was in despair. I mean, I just thought, here I am, part of this thing. I'm part of a body of troops in lockstep marching over. We're going to have a nuclear war by accident. This is a Mexican standoff, and all we're waiting for is one firecracker to go off or somebody to fart loudly, and everyone will start shooting. And then I saw this while on a Christmas break. I saw this discovery of this 2 pictures of this face on Mars, and I thought. Then I'm putting my little daughter to bed. She's only 3 years old. And I thought I had hope. I thought if there's a dead civilization on Mars, then the Russians and the United States would have to forget their differences and go take a joint mission up to Mars to investigate this thing. We would turn our attention outward rather than towards each other. And suddenly I thought, we can end this will end the Cold War. We're all saved. Yeah. My little daughter will actually grow up. And so I joined the investigation because I wanted to end the Cold War. And then we discovered, Sean, that we were organized. I was asked to join an organized investigation of these pictures on Mars, and we verified. But the headquarters of the organization was at a place called SRI in Palo Alto, California.
Yeah, this is the Stanford Research Institute, the same place where they came up with the remote viewing protocols. Yeah.
The headquarters for our science investigation of the Mars photos was just down the hall from where the remote viewing place was headquartered. I actually visited there. They had a Mars room. They had all these maps of Mars, and we had this very animated discussion about the shoreline of the ancient ocean and stuff like this.
Have you seen this? You can find this anywhere on the internet. The remote viewer Joe McMoneagle did a blind remote viewing of Mars. Over a million, before a million years ago. They said go back as far as you can, see people.
Yes. We discovered only many years later that the remote viewing thing had gone on, and that the government had conducted its own Mars investigation because of our investigation. Our investigation that I was part of was called the Independent Mars Investigation Team, IMIT, organized by Richard Hoagland, brilliant guy. So we investigated,
and
we
just real quick
verified that the pictures exist.
Just real quick for the audience, you're watching you're watching Through a Glass Darkly Radio, or listening to Through a Glass Darkly Radio on United Public Radio. So I just want to let folks know that. Go ahead, John. Sorry to start.
Just want to warn everybody, it's going to get even darker.
Yeah. Here we go.
It's going to get even more noir.
All right, go ahead, John. You're good.
So suddenly I had hope after seeing the things on Mars, and I was determined, because I was getting so bummed out working at Sandia National Labs. I was working on directed energy weapons, not nuclear weapons, but most of the lab worked on nuclear weapons. I just thought, I don't know if I can do this anymore. At Sandia, at Livermore, the nuclear weapons area had been very far isolated from the controlled fusion area. We didn't have much contact. And but at Sandia Labs, it was on a Kirtland Air Force base. The Cold War was just walking naked in front of me constantly, and I was starting to suffer from depression. Imagine at Christmas, you're singing "O Little Town of Bethlehem" in your church, and near Christmas Eve, and all I could think of was, well, what happened to Bethlehem after Jesus was born here? Herod's troops came and massacred everybody. All the male children under 2 years old were killed. I just thought, I'm starting to lose my marbles over this. This constant. The morale had collapsed at the lab, and there I was sitting there, a rational person trying to figure out what to do. And then suddenly I saw the Face on Mars stuff done by DePietro Molinar, and I thought, we're saved. If we can just explore this and verify it, and we did verify it. We verified the pictures existed. We got the actual digital tapes of the pictures, and we ordered prints of the pictures from NASA, and then that's also when I looked for another site on Mars. I could see where the photos, high resolution photos, had been taken on Mars. And so I ordered a swath of high resolution pictures at what looked like the ocean shoreline, similar to Cydonia Mensa. And that's where I discovered the Galaxis Chaos.
And John, was this part of the Richard Hoagland investigation of Mars?
Yes, it was. It was part of the Richard Hoagland. And you can, there's a great book called by Randy Pozos called The Face on Mars, where he documents all of this. And so
you have a book too about all this too, right? What's that book?
It's called Death on Mars. Death on Mars, instead of Life on Mars. Well, I have another book called Life and Death on Mars, which is about reconstructing Mars past biosphere, that Mars was Earth-like in the past, and presumably had life on it, since it had the same. Earth and Mars basically started with the same kind of conditions and then evolved the same way until something terrible happened on Mars, this new thermonuclear holocaust. So what I now understand is that we live, well, the best phrase that captures it is as above, so below. If you want to know, there's in SETI, there's an article called Mediocrity. It says that the human race is not remarkable in the universe. We're mediocre. We're not remarkable. We're typical. So that means if you want to know what intelligent life in the universe acts like, just turn on the news.
Mm-hmm.
And, rampant misbehavior. And so everything that happened, all of the terrible things that have happened on Earth in our history happen elsewhere in the universe. The Bhagavad Gita, the Hindu holy books, report that there is death and misery on all worlds. They speaks of extraterrestrial life in the Bhagavad Gitas, and so what we see on Mars is the sort of tragedy that humans have created on Earth, like Hiroshima and Nagasaki, or Dresden, or the firebombing of Tokyo, for that matter. They didn't need a nuclear weapon to kill the 100,000 people there. They just firebombed.
I mean, that's why they
city.
picked two relatively pristine cities, right? So they could show the destructive effect.
Exactly.
I think Kyoto was the third target because it had been touched, because it had spiritual and religious significance.
Yes. And I'm very glad that Kyoto was actually on the top of the initial target list, but the person who was helping to determine the list had visited there, and it was such a beautiful city. He says, "No, let's see if we can spare this." Maybe
we should send out a shout out to U.S. mayors. Maybe, if you clean up your cities a little bit, people won't they'll be lower on the nuke list if we ever get into war with somebody. Anyway, just that's a digression, but John, let's keep going. Keep going.
Yes, we're going through a difficult period. They're exploring various new sociological theories, and of course they're failing, in my opinion.
For the predictable results, I don't think we need an experiment.
Well, yeah,
but I guess every generation has to relearn the same stupid lessons 3 generations ago learned. But anyway, I feel like we're in the Red Guards kind of phase of the Cultural Revolution. But
we are in
that's neither here nor there.
Phase,
let's keep
that's neither
focus.
Here nor there.
Focus, John. Focus.
Well, so Mars was apparently like an Alderaan in Star Wars, where they asked Governor Tarkin, "Why are you hitting Alderaan instead of Tatooine?" And he says, "Tatooine's far too remote to make a good example." He says, "We want a good example for the rest of the planets in the galaxy to, not resist the Emperor's new rule." And so they destroyed Alderaan, and Mars was it wasn't blown to pieces, but it was basically turned into a moon-like planet. And that happened a long, long time ago, before the dinosaurs on Earth, at least according to the best estimates I can make. The problem with a lot of these dates are determined radiologically by isotopes. And if you had a big nuclear event where everything got irradiated with neutrons, and they found meteorites from Mars from recent, the younger meteorites from Mars had been exposed to all these neutrons, like from a nuclear explosion. They had to put rock inside nuclear reactors and irradiate it for days to get as many neutrons as they found on some of these Mars rocks. So it was.
So the data you got with the xenon ratios, isotopic ratios, came from material in asteroids, meteorites, etc.
Well, actually, no. It was direct sampling of the Mars atmosphere by the 2 Viking landers half a century ago. And by the way, there is no explanation for that. The most recent article where they remeasured all the ratios on Mars, and including this Xenon 129, they just spoke of it as a mystery. There is no explanation.
Consternating. So much consternation. Right.
Yes. Well, and of course, if they're aware of my research, they know in the back of their minds, this is a sign of intelligent activity of the worst kind, which is very familiar on Earth. So but there is now Mars is part of the great ET cover-up. It's a second front, basically. You had in World War II, you had the European theater against Nazi Germany, and then you had the Pacific theater against Imperial Japan. And Mars can be viewed as the Pacific theater of this conflict. And I'm very proud to be one of the leaders of that. We have a lot of people working on this problem. The nice thing about Mars, by the way, is there's lots of scientific data. You can cite journals and people take measurements. I complained to a friend of mine who's in the UFO field. I said, the problem, his name is Don Ecker. He's a really smart guy. You should have him on your show. And I said, he's a former Green Beret. And I said, Don, the problem with ufology is there are no facts, there are only reports. But on Mars, we have all of this data. We have registered NASA images. We have images from other space agencies now. And we have all of this data on the meteorites showing all this radiation damage. And so we're very pleased. We have basically landed in the Philippines on Mars, in a sense, or Okinawa. We're closing in on the Mars cover-up, and if the Mars cover-up goes, the UFO cover-up will be considerably weakened, because then we'll have a completely separate line of evidence of intelligent life in the cosmos, and the human race must understand reality. It must understand reality, that we are one of many, many species in the cosmos. We're just a speck of dust. We're not masters of the single living oasis in the universe. We're masters of an oasis in the great desert. There's a nice thing though, and I want everyone to understand this. Yes, the human race is just a speck of dust in the cosmos. So is everybody else.
Well, maybe. I mean, you would think it would be denser because we're on the third spiral arm of a galaxy. You would think toward the galactic core there would be more concentration.
Well, there's a lot more supernovas there, and there's a giant black hole in the center. So the radiation environment may actually be much more severe towards the center of the galaxy. We may be in just about the right place. What's really fascinating, by the way, is, since I like to think about the big picture, is that if you look at the galaxy, there's various spiral arms. There's the Perseus arm, and then I guess the Orion arm, or the Sagittarius arm, and then the Perseus arm. And there's a spur arm that runs between those two arms of stars, where stars are very dense. And we sit right in the middle of that bridge arm. So our location is strategic. And not only that, locally, we're in an area in interstellar space called the local bubble, where apparently there was a large supernova that went off and cleared out all the gas. And so there's fewer stars in this region than there is there's a big wall of stars around us. If you're looking down from the top of the galaxy, you see the Earth is in the center, almost a dead center in a circular void. So we apparently are in the center of a Romulan neutral zone. That would explain why there are reports of many different species visiting here. And one reason they find us so fascinating is we're dead center in the middle of this region. That means we own, in the great cosmic monopoly game, we got dealt Boardwalk and Park Place. So that means, yes, we're a speck of dust. So is everybody else, but we're not your typical speck of dust. We're actually a speck of dust that that lies in an unclaimed region of space. I use the example, we're Luxembourg, trapped between Belgium, Germany, and France. Why does Luxembourg even exist? You'd think one of the bigger powers would have taken it a long time ago. Well, it's because if one side tries to take Luxembourg, if Germany tries, then Belgium and France unite against it. And this is why Luxembourg exists. And one of the cities right on the border of Luxembourg with Belgium is Bastogne. So it's a very strategic area. That's where the Battle of the Bulge occurred. So it's a very strategic area. And it isn't claimed by, it's got three major powers around it. And then of course, there's the Netherlands, even up further north. And it exists because it's bordered by three powerful nations. And therefore, if one tries to move in there, the other two will combine against it. And so it's stalemated. So it survives because it is of its location, its strategic location. And I believe the Earth civilization has been allowed to develop unmolested. Oh, I heard one really funny thing. I heard that the rumors are that Hitler was trying to enter an alliance with the reptilians, one of these species that people claim exists. And someone was breathlessly telling me this. And then I said, well, they didn't seem to have helped him very much, did they? Considering he lost the war disastrously. So if they do exist, they're actually fairly poor allies.
So, or maybe they just seed technology so that we integrate it faster than we figure out how to, develop as a species, either spiritually, philosophically, etc. Right?
Exactly. It could be. Well, technology of all kinds advanced very strongly, including development of nuclear weapons during World War II. Do you know, by the way, what was stored at Roswell?
Nuclear weapons. It was the only nuclear. Yeah, it was the only nuclear weapons.
All of the nuclear weapons
strategic
on Earth
in the world.
Yes.
Right.
All 5 nuclear weapons. They had 5 Nagasaki type Fat Man weapons stored along with B-29 bombers to carry them. That was at Roswell, and nobody knew it at the time. They just thought it was just an Army air base. And no, it was probably, if you're from another planet and you're trying to scope out the military strength of the Earth, you would focus on Roswell because that's where you would pick up, the radiation from these nuclear weapons. And what did they do? Apparently, according to reports, they didn't lose just one saucer over Roswell the night of like July 3rd or July 4th.
Yeah, it was like Corona and Socorro, right? Was it Corona and Socorro?
Yeah, one was near Corona, crashed near Corona, and the other one crashed near Socorro. So, as the heroine of my novel comments, she says, to lose one saucer over, the nuclear weapons site, only nuclear weapons site on Earth, sounds like a tragedy, but to lose 2 sounds like incompetence, she says. She's kind of an intellectual. And
well, isn't there?
Yeah,
why did they crash? By the way? Why did they crash? Why did they crash?
Oh, I think
allegedly. What's the theory? Say more about that.
My personal theory is they were shot down. They got bit by a black widow over the night fighter at that time was the P-61 Black Widow. It was a World War II plane, had a big radar dish, and it had a fiberglass nose with a big radar dish. So it had its own radar, and it had a turret with 4 50 caliber machine guns on the top of the plane. And then it had 4 20 millimeter cannons on the base of the plane. So it had tremendous firepower. and you had crews that were veterans of World War II. And I think they, according to Philip Corso, the day after Roswell, the U.S. government was very aware that the UFOs were. This is according to his book. They were very aware that this was a threat, and that the aliens were doing reconnaissance of the Earth, of our military facilities. So they had mobilized a lot of resources to guard our specific things in New Mexico, he said. And one of those, the night fighter of those days, they didn't have jet fighters that were capable of night flying at that point, but they did have the P-61 Black Widow, and they would have had veteran, and all of the P-61 squadrons that were based in Japan and in Germany were pulled into the United States when the 1947 UFO sightings started to occur. They were pulled back into the United States. So that's what I think happened. People said, "Oh, they got hit by lightning over Roswell." Two of them, or they ran into each other. Really? The one that crashed at Socorro was fairly intact, but it had a big gash in the side. And if you look at U.S. bombers that were shot down in World War II, they have big gashes on the sides. That's because German 20 millimeter cannons. That's what the shell. If the shell doesn't do an impact directly, goes right through, it slices open the fuselage, and it makes a big gash on it. And I think that's what happened. That's 20 millimeter cannon damage. And apparently one of them just exploded. It was just a big flash of light. And then there wasn't any more. The pilots probably didn't know what happened, but they chased one of them that was wounded, and it allowed it to, it crashed near Socorro. That's my own reconstruction. I put that in my novel about the collapse of the.
Well, I think Corso said somebody took a shot at it, hit it. Like,
oh, absolutely,
took a shot at the alleged non-human intelligence, right? Who knows where these craft came from? Maybe they come from space, maybe they come from another. Who knows? But somebody hit it, according to Corso, his account. So
I agree. The accounts of the people who woke up. There was a guy who was inspecting irrigation ditches. He looks up, he's out there early in the morning, and he sees this crash thing, and army trucks arrived as soon as it was dawn. So
just before the firefighters did, right?
Alamogordo.
Yeah.
Before we've heard that before,
police.
Haven't we? Before the firefighters arrived, the FBI arrived. That was during Watergate, and so. I was very honored to be part of a Recollections of Roswell meeting where they got together a very rich person, funded everyone who was a close relative or a survivor of Roswell Air Base to come to Washington, D.C. and have interviews done. And we would have dinner with them and talk with them, and a great time was had by all. And the mindset of these people was like the two daughters of the sheriff, the local sheriff, were there, and they said, "We just gotten done with World War II," and they set off the first atomic bomb. And it lit up the entire sky at night. They said their father came home one night and was just terrified because something had lit up the entire sky. And they said it was an ammo dump explosion. And he didn't believe it. He said it was too bright. It was too. He says, I don't know what happened. And they had just gone through World War II. They had the nuclear test had occurred. They were used to just not asking questions, and they were near Alamogordo. They weren't supposed to ask questions about what was going on there. It's all very secret.
Well, Mac Brazel,
And
they saw him. He disappeared for like 2 days, right? And then the
oh
first time they
yes,
saw
yeah,
him, he was driving a brand new truck, and like
a brand
nothing
new
to say
truck.
anymore. Yeah.
And they the I don't know, maybe you maybe more know what had happened. Apparently is the Japanese had been launching, these balloons with bombs on them from
Oh
Japan, and the
yeah.
prevailing winds would carry them over the United States.
Yeah,
And
it
they
was
were
their. It was
one of them
their.
fell on the
I can't remember the unit. It was like unit and then 3 numbers, but it was the unit that it was like their biological warfare unit, and they actually
yeah,
killed some people
but
with
they
some of these bioweapons.
oh
Yeah.
one of them fell on the town where I grew up in and
Oh
killed
wow.
somebody. Yeah, so it was actually, and Mac Brazel had found one of these things before on his property, and they gave him a reward for finding it. So when he found this is the story I heard. He found the Japanese balloon, turned it in, and got a big reward. So he thought when he found this other stuff, he was going to get a
Big
reward,
money. Big money.
big money.
Unit set.
And
Yeah, Unit 731 is the unit, I think.
Unit
If the internet,
731,
if the interwebs are right.
and guess how the government dealt with this? They just didn't tell anybody what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
If a bomb fell in your backyard, or a balloon crashed in your backyard and you went out to poke around, you were supposed to exercise your common sense and stay away from it, call the military. But they didn't allow any publication of any, because they wanted the Japanese to think that all the bombs were ending up in the Pacific Ocean and not even
Yeah, they
reaching
didn't want to
United
panic the
States.
American people that there's bioweapons
Oh
dropping on
no,
you from the sky.
could have been bioweapons. So the Japanese certainly had bioweapons. They tried using them in China and infected, succeeded in infecting one of their entire armies with bubonic plague. They were trying to use it on the Chinese, and instead it got into the Japanese troops. So it was a disaster. And
Mm-hmm.
so anyway, so Brazel had turned in this bomb balloon and gotten a reward for it. So he found this other stuff. So, it was only a couple of years after World War II had ended. So he went and turned it into the sheriff and expected to get a reward. And then of course he disappeared for a couple of days, and then was seen driving around with a brand new truck. And somebody asked him about
It
it.
must have been a tense negotiation, right? Yeah, it must have been one of those guys
and somebody
he was threatened. He's like, "Go ahead, kill me. You're going to have to explain it to everybody." So they probably went with the stick first, and then had to come around to the carrot.
Well, people asked him, "Well, what about that stuff you found?" And he said, "Next time I find anything strange on my property, I'm not telling nobody about it," he says. So he learned his lessons from that. The guys on the base, they had, these were really elite guys. These were the very best veterans. They kept them in the service with, bonuses and stuff like this afterward, because they were B-29 pilots and ground crews that were just really good at their job. They had the best B-29 squadron in the country was there at Roswell with the bombs to carry. And the base suddenly, and it was at the Socorro site, there was this red-haired colonel barking orders at everybody. And he was considered, Colonel Son of a Bitch, they called him. And he showed up at the Roswell Air Base then the next couple days after they'd gotten this stuff. And so they said that this red-haired colonel, it was the Army Air Corps in those days, so it was the Army, showed up and just took over the base. And they had already, their base press office had actually released, we captured a UFO, and that was told, they had to issue an immediate retraction on that. General Ramey down in Texas had chewed him out royally over the phone. And so for about a week, everything was in complete chaos. And people moved bodies and pieces of junk and stuff with writing on them and everything. Everybody saw that. And one guy who was there at the meeting didn't say anything about bodies, but on his deathbed, he said, "Yes, I saw the bodies." So he, and I knew who he was. I talked to him several
Well,
times at the conference.
Corso
So,
claimed to have seen
well,
one
they
in
says,
transit at Fort Riley, right? He had been kind
oh,
of he was
I,
he was on
you
staff
know,
duty. He was on staff duty, which is the
on,
most mindless duty you have to do as an officer, where you just go around, you have it for a night, and you go and check all the water tanks, and you check the barracks, and you just have this
oh yeah,
checklist. And he went to check and this warehouse, and then he ran into one of his sergeants, and the sergeant's like, he had the guy's face was ashen, and he's like, what's
yeah.
going on? He's like, sir, just you can't tell anybody, just follow me. And he goes in, and they open up this crate, and inside the crate there's a body in some sort of fluid, embalming fluid or something.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it's the first time that, at least Corso claims, right, if his story is to be believed,
sure.
that he
Well,
saw
they
one of
said
these
he
things.
brought a stenographer to his deathbed. People had
Mhm.
said, "Oh, he made this stuff up," and no, he brought a stenographer and made a deathbed statement saying, "Everything I put in that book is true to the best of my knowledge." That's all I can say. And so,
Yeah,
so
the only
yeah,
question I have
he
is
was just duty
he was
officer trying to
he
get
was an
through the night,
intelligence guy.
and
Yeah, he was an intelligence
yes, he
officer
was.
eventually. So there's some stuff that's most likely true, and there might be some stuff in there that, because they say you balance
Oh,
some disinformation with every piece of truth. So when you're reading it, you
absolutely.
just have to take that. And I already found one inconsistency. There's one part in the book he talks about a delta shaped craft, and then there's another, the rest of the book, at least where I've been, he talks about a crescent shaped craft. So it's like, which is it, right? Can't be both.
I know. Yeah. Well, I also read his book. It was quite some time ago, but I remember him talking about that the military and intelligence organizations had mobilized resources to New Mexico because there have been a lot of
Mhm.
UFO sightings there, and they wanted to be prepared for anything. And so, um, so the the funniest comment I heard though is that after all of this had died down, um, that the base went back to normal as you could be, presiding over the world's supply of nuclear weapons. They had a
Mhm.
meeting of the officers, and the guy who was running the base was a very popular colonel named Blanchard. Everybody loved him, and they're having the meeting of a bunch of the officers, and somebody says, "Well, Colonel, what exactly happened last week? Do you know it?" And all he would say is he smiled and he says, "Guys, all I can say is, boy, did we screw up." Apparently, by releasing what they had found to the
Mhm.
newspapers, and he said, "That's all I'm going to say." In other
Well,
words, end of
apparently that's how the
discussion. No more
Russians
discussion of what happened.
apparently that's how the Soviets knew it was real, because when the first report was released, they thought it was some sort of a deception operation by the US government to conceal something else. And then the moment
Yeah.
that story was retracted, Stalin knew it was real.
Oh yeah. Yeah. He's, they were masters at disinformation and information and disinformation. Maskarova, and that's the
Maskarovka,
Russian term for
Maskarovka.
it.
Right, right.
Maskarovka, and they've done it all the time in World War II. Don't let the Germans know what the hell you're going to do. Make them think you're going to do something else. And so it's interesting. The story I heard, by the way, in Washington, D.C., just around the water cooler and the coffee machine, was that some of the places I worked was that the Russian attitude towards these ETs was, if they saw an unidentified flying object over the Soviet Union, they just would scramble the MiGs and, open up on it as soon as they saw it, because they figured it was probably American or British spy plane. And
They lost a lot
only
of
finally
pilots
when
doing that, though.
they did lose a lot of MiGs, and they finally brought one down, and the Interior Minister troops arrived and brought out the good Russian Krobarsky and pried open the hatch and looked inside. Nie Amerikansky, these aren't Americans. And
Well, it depends on what theory.
but
It
then
depends on what theory you subscribe to in terms of what these
didn't.
things are.
The Russian,
right? They may have been Americans from the far future. Who knows, right?
yes,
I'm not saying they were, but
yes.
I don't think we know where these things are from unless we have some sort of a treaty.
Oh,
I don't know.
Let me tell you something. We understand how you could fly in outer space. We've done it ourselves because of the work I've done, and like people like Hal Puthoff, another very good physicist, in addition to being a remote viewer. We know that you can change gravitational fields now with electromagnetism. We've done it in the lab. We've made things lose a tiny amount of weight. That's actually out on the web.
Well, even the chief,
the vacuum Bernoulli equation.
Well, even the Dr. Kirkpatrick, who claims that there's no such evidence of anything existing ever about UAPs or non-human technology UAPs. He's doubled down since then. You know what his PhD thesis was on? It was on phonons.
What?
He earned his PhD phonons.
Phonons. Yeah.
So this, like, phone for just the audience, phonons are like photons, only for vibrational energy instead of light, and they possess an antigravitic property where they have negative gravity. They exhibit negative gravity, and this guy's PhD thesis was published in 1995. So this guy knows what the score is. He's just no malice. He's just doing his job. His job is to keep this thing back in the bottle, right?
I consider that I'm doing my job. I'm supposed to defend this country and the human race as a whole. I published my work on the unified field theory back in 1992, and Hal Puthoff and my theory very similar. Hal Puthoff has a theory unifying gravity and electromagnetism. I get big G, which is the Newton gravitation constant, falls out of my theory to a part per thousand. So I presented that at a scientific conference with a bunch of string theorists. They gave me the ultimate compliment, Sean. They got angry with me. If I hadn't had my girlfriend standing there next to me, I think one of them would have punched me. One of them accused me of mathematical sleight of hand, that I somehow concealed the Newton gravitation constant in one side of the equation, made it pop out of the other. I said, there's the formula where, there's G. Where is it on this other side? And it was just like a brawl at my high school where I grew up. Could always tell there was a brawl because there would be a circle of people standing in the parking lot after the school let out at my high school, and there was a fight going on in the middle of the crowd. So the crowd gathered to watch us do the space down. And I said, "Okay, here it is. Show me where big G is on this side of the equation, so it can pop out on this side." And his angry look slowly faded, and then he just turned and walked away. Then this other graybeard came up and looked at my work. I had it up on a big bulletin board, and he was studying everything very carefully. And I said, "Sir, I can walk you through this if you'd like." And he turned to me with just a look of just utter anger and said to me, "No, I can read it for myself," he says. So I thought, all that string theory thing, they never got the big G or the gravitation constant. I got it. And so I published that.
They're too focused on the beauty of the math, on the elegance of the math, right?
I tell people, I said, string theory is like giving somebody some fine cooking sherry to cook a turkey with, and then going back into the kitchen and the the cook is drunk on the cooking share. He's forgotten all about the bird. And so anyway, it's well, and string theory has completely diverted the attention of the American physics community
Right.
away
And the
from
resources and
anti-gravity. Yeah. It's
is that
pulled us off
intentional?
into, I think since the government funds research, it controls what people work on because it controls the grants. So
Right.
anybody who there's four great forces that run the universe that we know of: gravity and electromagnetism. Those are long range forces. They reach for across the entire universe. Then there's the strong force and the weak force. The strong force holds together the nuclear. That's what causes nuclear weapons to work. And then there's the weak force. It causes radioactive decay. And so those are short range forces. But the two long range forces, and it was Einstein's dream that the two long range forces could be made to unify.
And that's electromagnetism and gravity.
Yeah, electromagnetism and gravity. And he even commented, he said, it's as if the U.S. government doesn't want me working on this theory anymore, he says. And so somebody commented, the third force is money. So it's so anyway, I started publishing my theory. You look up gem theory, Brandenburg, or gravitation constant, Brandenburg, and I've published in a bunch of referee journals now. I've gone to many conferences, presented my work. I talked to Hal Puthoff and talked about the comparisons between his theory and mine. And I said, Hal, did you see my latest work? And Hal gave me a great compliment. He said, John, I read everything you publish. Meaning, I'm watching you, and he's on the inside of the. He certainly knows a lot more than I do about what's really going on, and he's a he's a fine fellow.
Don't they call? Isn't he a member of the quote unquote Avery? Yeah, Avery, and he's the owl.
Oh well, I was actually part of the Avery myself for a while without realizing it. I'd been recruited, and
what was your code? What was your code name?
Hamburger or something like this. I don't know. I was obviously bottom of the totem pole. And
you weren't a bird? You didn't have a bird
because
like a
I was never told what I was called, probably mockingbird or sparrow or something, and or turkey. Who knows?
I haven't heard turkey yet, so maybe it's turkey. Who knows?
It's turkey, yeah. So I was told that I was actually part of the Avery, even though I didn't know it. And so then somebody says, I'm not part. It was part of the guy who was part of the same email group that I found myself in. And we're getting all of this stuff, circulated all these emails and asking for comments and stuff. So I made some comments. I tried to be helpful.
Is this the famous Sarfati email list?
No, that's a different one.
Okay.
And
it's different. All right, I won't push. I
would actually be included on that one. No, Jack Sarfati is a really smart guy. And he and I agree on most things, except, I call him Wolfman Jack because he'll go on he has a bad temper and he'll get mad at people, including me, and go off and say all of this outrageous stuff about us. And,
then forget about it, and you're good. You're good after that. You're good after that, right?
I'm good after that.
He just vents.
Yeah,
that's fine.
He just vents, but he's a very smart guy, and he agrees that we can change gravity fields with electromagnetism. We probably disagree on the details of how to do that, but we can do it. And I use three-phase Tesla rotating fields. And there's probably other ways to do it. And we both also agree that we're not alone in the universe. And we also agree that some of the people out there are not very nice. And those those are the three big things that we agree on, and that's so. Therefore, I say more power to him. But I will just simply say that yeah, one guy in our group said, "I'm not part of any aviary," and I responded, "Tweet for yourself." Because if you're on this group, you're part of the aviary. And then Jack would have these email groups. It was kind of more of an ant farm than an aviary. And I would basically, after he would go off on these tirades against various people in the group, I just said, Jack, take me off this list. And so then I would be off the list for about a year, and then suddenly I would find myself back on it, and he would include me. It was like, okay, Brandenburg has certainly forgotten about all of that stuff that happened before. So the government has cultivated. I tell people, I said, I am the clueless tool of the federal government. I'm part of a faction in the government that apparently wants ET disclosure to occur. My own belief, it is the CIA, the Navy, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and some of the other our allied intelligence agency want the UFO cover-up to end.
Yeah, they're the good guys. Look, I'm going to be
they're the good guys,
and then they're the good guys, right? Then there's the Air Force.
And
I will just leave it at that.
Then there is the interesting case of the Air Force, which says nothing. And that's not going to be good for them. What?
That's not an accident.
Oh no! The UFO cover-up is basically part of the founding charter of the Air Force. I mean, the UFO Air Force was founded after Roswell, and so
it was almost. I think the National Security Act was passed in the same month. In fact, so it was already.
Yes.
They were already gearing up for it, and then this alleged incident happens, and it just kind of
According to my reading of the reports, the government had known basically since the Battle of Los Angeles that there were UFOs.
Yeah, that was what, 1942. Was that 1942 over Los Angeles?
Right after Pearl Harbor, and they may have even known before that because there was a crash in Missouri, and that's Truman. Right? Yeah, Camp Girardeau.
Gerardo. Not Camp.
Girardeau.
Cape Girardeau. Yeah.
Cape Girardeau. Cape Girardeau, and where Truman had trained to be an artillery officer before he was being sent to Europe. He was a combat veteran, and he was one tough cookie, and he'd been in heavy combat in World War I, where they had a bunch of French 75s, and then the Germans would counter battery fire on them. And he described one incident where his troops started breaking and running and abandoning their guns, and he had to stand in their way and curse them and their mothers and everything to get them to go back to their guns, And he said the only reason he didn't run is because he was so scared his legs were paralyzed. And so then he was also a Mason. So the Masons knew what had happened at Cape Girardeau in Missouri. So when he got to be president, he actually was far more cognizant of this. He knew that this phenomenon existed before he was suddenly it ended up on his doorstep after Roswell. So he wasn't a completely in the dark person. He was actually probably quite cognizant. That may have been why they appointed him vice president, for all I know.
So somebody's asking about. I'm not going to say the name since we're on the radio and we're reaching a much broader audience.
Yeah.
But I'm just going to flash it in front of you here, because there was an interview.
NASA Space Force. There's no such thing as a NASA Space Force.
Well, I have an interesting story. Space Force. Yes, NRO,
Space Force,
and the National Reconnaissance Office was part of it. But anyway, there's this figure that's associated with Chris Bledsoe. Chris Bledsoe just says the name anytime he interviews with people. But if like Diana Walsh Pasulka still doesn't say his name because apparently it's that.
The name, I've never heard that name, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, there's a reason you never heard of that name. So yeah, there's a reason you.
Yeah.
But anyway, I know another podcaster who interviewed Chris Bledsoe, and the interview was doing really well, and then all of a sudden it just dropped off like nothing. So when you reach a certain size in YouTube, you get like a manager at YouTube that represents you, answers your questions, things like that. So he called his manager,
Yeah.
and he said, like, what's going on with this? It suddenly just dropped off. And she said it's been shadow banned. And she didn't like dance around it. She said it's been shadow banned. And he's like, well, why? And she said that it was a decision made by the executives. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
But so his, so I'm not going to say the name of the podcast or anything like that, but he believes it was because they mentioned that name, and it reached a very broad audience.
Yep.
And they were not super happy about that. So again, this is all speculation, but there are definitely, if you get a little bit too close on certain things, where your channel starts to behave strangely, you're not getting as many views and things like that. That's why, or that may be why. That could be a reason why.
I had a friend call me recently and asked me if I was willing to testify to Congress about the stuff I'd found on Mars. And I was a little reluctant. By the way, when I found the stuff on Mars, I basically briefed somebody from the Defense Intelligence Agency. I knew there was a Mars desk there, and they sent somebody over. I showed him everything I'd found, and he took careful notes, took them all very seriously. He says, we'll get back to you. I told him, I said, what do I do? Should I publish this? Should I sit on it? What? He said, we'll get back to you. And I thought, well, okay, that's the last I'll ever hear of this. And no, 6 weeks later, they sent a message back through channels saying, we see no reason why this shouldn't be published.
So the question with that is, did that serve any interest on? So the question on that end, does that serve any interest for them to get that out as part of a slow drip of disclosure? Or is there something about that they know that you don't, that allows that to serve as misinformation or disinformation? Sorry.
Even in the MJ12 documents, which were released, and I believed Stanton Friedman's analysis that these were authentic was correct. And in fact, when I got them, they came through my front door mail slot. I looked at them and turned them into the FBI. Because I'm sitting there reading this stuff with all this classified markings, and I just thought, this just arrived in the open mail. So I took it down to the FBI headquarters.
Yeah, it could be a form of entrapment
too,
it to
right?
Them. Like said, you were reading classified information.
Oh yeah, they said, you can't turn that stuff in here. We don't have the proper safes for it. And they said, you'll have to call the local. This was FBI headquarters, J. Edgar Hoover building. So they said, you'll have to call the local field office, have them come and pick it up. And I said, well, fine, and so this lady with a clipboard followed me across, and I called up. It was just a phone booth. They had pay phones on this, or just phones. So I called the local field office and explained to them, that I gotten these documents that were apparently marked classified. And the guy says, what do they talk about? And I said, well, they talk about crashed UFOs and, in Roswell, New Mexico. And he says, they're trash. Burn them, destroy them. And I said, I'm not doing anything with them. I said, in fact, I'm not leaving this building with these documents. They're your problem. So I turned to the lady who was writing there, scribbling on her, and I dropped them right on her clipboard. So, and then I walked out of building like this, backwards with my hands up. Don't give me even try to give me back those documents. I'm not going to take them. And they sent them back to me a month later, saying that no laws that they had jurisdiction over had apparently been violated. That was what they said. It was really bizarre. It was like, I thought I'm in a science fiction movie here. And, but by that time I was
you got them back?
kind of up. I put them in plastic covers and put them in a binder. Then I had to get interviewed for another, position that required deep, higher clearances.
Mm-hmm.
And they asked me if I'd ever seen classified documents mishandled. And I said, well, I got some in the mail like this. And they said, you did? And I said, yeah. And then they sent them back to me. They said, could you bring those documents in so we could look at them? And I said, well, sure. So I brought them in. The next day, they were interviewing me, and they're taking a lie detector test and stuff like this. So I brought them in, and they took them and didn't give them back. And they said, we looked at these documents, and they look like they were released through Freedom of Information Act. So they're okay. Don't worry about them. We'll take them from here. So it was all very strange. And then I got my clearance. So apparently it was not considered a security incident. I'd already gotten in trouble once for mishandling a classified thing. And, well, I made sure it wasn't compromised or anything like that. But like I got a copy made of a classified document and took it to my home office, and they refused to take it. They said, we can't take that thing. There's no, what are we going to say on our inventory? These people made a copy of it for you and gave it to you. And so I just took it home and shredded it and flushed it down the toilet. That's all I could do. And then this got reported as a security incident. I basically had to write 1,000 times on the board, I will never mishandle classified documents ever again. My sin was to ask for a copy of something I'd seen, to take back to my office.
And you should have been a U.S. politician. You should have been a U.S. politician, because then you can have pallets of that stuff in your garage, in your hotel,
my Corvette
on your server. Yeah, on your server.
Yes.
Look, I'm. They're all. They all do it. They all do this.
I can give them to my secretary, and then who gives them to her husband named Wiener.
Yeah. Right.
It's just, it's, well, anyway, so it's all a lot of smoke and mirrors, and it's intelligence. And of course, there's disinformation and information mixed in there. And, and that's the way it's supposed to be. That's the way Sean, that's the way they're supposed to run it. And we never let the enemies know what we know, or let them think that we know something different than what we do know, etc. So, but on Mars, I have scientific data, and I've been able to publish scientific articles in journals that are refereed. And so I published the thermonuclear holocaust.
Now, what did you do to figure out how long ago it happened? Like, how did you measure the rocks before the event and then the rocks after the event? Because presumably they would have had different chemical compositions or different isotopic ratios, right?
The meteorites from Mars. Mars is very odd in that Mars has kind of a split personality. The southern part is what are called highlands. They're much higher in elevation than the north part. And they're heavily cratered, and they have water channels mixed in with all the craters. So there was obviously a lot of water down there, a lot of craters, and that stuff has been preserved kind of from the foundation era of Mars. Then you have the north, where some of the locales look almost terrestrial. There are almost no craters, especially where the old ocean apparently sat. And it's a much lower elevation. being higher air density. And that's the young part of Mars, because they determine ages by, relative ages at least, by how many craters per square mile. So the north has to be younger than the south. What's
And by the
interesting
way,
is
just
we have
to
these.
interrupt really quickly, for folks listening, this is Through a Glass Darkly with Sean Patrick Hazlett, and you're listening to us on United Public Radio. All right, sorry, John, I had to get that out.
Right. No, that's all right. You have to do that. And but what's interesting is that if you take the meteorites from Mars and they can radiometrically date them, and of course they have to date them by radioactive decay of certain elements. But I have never seen an analysis of how that would.
Yeah, so I imagine what you would do is you would get a rock that happened before the event.
So what?
Right?
Just on the face of it, what they do is they radio.
Go ahead, John. You're still here.
Oh, okay, yeah. And
on the face of it,
what they do is they date the rocks the same as on the face of it, they just date them the same way they would date Earth rocks. And almost all of the meteorites, 90% of them they get, are quite young. Their date from roughly the time of the dinosaurs on Earth, or roughly the dawn of advanced life on Earth at the what's called the Precambrian, about 500 million years ago. No, actually, it's about 1.2 billion years ago, when life had really. And then so big rock hits Mars, throws little rocks out into space. They end up on Earth. You'd think you'd get a very much distribution of impacts on Mars, and you get a whole range of ages of Mars meteorites, from very old to very young. Okay, so they see the young. They now have 3 old ones. For a while, they didn't have any. ALH 8401 is one of those very ancient ones. Now they've found some others that are almost the same age. And what they do is they show that Mars was warm, wet, and very rich in organic matter when it was first formed. Just like Earth. And just like life started on Earth, apparently started almost immediately. As soon as there was a liquid ocean on Earth, you have signs of life. So on Mars, apparently, you have signs of biology in these rocks, or pre-biology at least. And so we tend the neutron exposure and the elevated levels of trapped gas in the meteorites, which have the xenon. The xenon isotopes from the very early stuff doesn't have this xenon 129 excess. It's only found
it's the same as the rest of the solar system. Right.
It's the very old, kind of like it's the same as the rest of the solar system. It's only in the young meteorites where you find the xenon 129 excess. So what that gives you is an approximate date, somewhere between 200 million years ago and a billion years ago, this event occurred. And the best I can do is just do an average, split the difference. And that's about 500 million years ago. There was we basically had trilobites on Earth at the time when this happened. But then when Mars went into a deep freeze, lost almost all its atmosphere, so the erosion all goes away, and water, is one of the big erosive forces on Earth. So we ended up with a Mars surface that was pretty much clear of erosion, except maybe for sandblasting from dust. And so it would preserve, large, massive archaeological things like we find.
Mhm.
And so, but the tentative age is about 500 million years ago. And that's my best guesstimate. Unfortunately, because of the radiation actually affects the radiometric clocks. And I've seen no analysis of that, even though people in the same breath, they'll say, oh, these Mars rocks were heavily irradiated by neutrons. But then they quote the ages as if they weren't irradiated with neutrons. So that's I'm a plasma physicist working on confining hot gas for thermonuclear fusion and for rocket propulsion in space. So I'm not aware of the models where you would even model the effect of these neutrons on the radiometric ages. So I'm just giving a best guess. And
All right, I think we have.
Some people
only have a few minutes. Yeah, so I think we only have a few minutes left.
Criticize me for not coming up with more. Oh, okay.
So,
well, Sean, this has been just a wonderful opportunity to talk.
Yeah, this has been fantastic. Well, last question for you. I'm going to take us way off.
Last question. All right.
Last question. How do you think disclosure plays out, if at all, if they don't put it back in the bottle?
Oh, the disclosure is going to happen. The dike is failing. The dike is bringing so many leaks now that people, in a sense, are ready now. Mm-hmm. They're ready to understand. And by the way, I'll tell you and I believe this with all my heart, the human race will get through this difficult period of finding out we're just a speck of dust with a lot of other specks of dust. We'll still end up thinking that we're somehow a special speck of dust in God's eyes, and that's fine. Our location, in fact, is special. I believe the future of the human race will look like Star Trek.
We need to think that in order to power us through it, I think.
Oh, absolutely. We're going to be just like Star Trek. In Star Trek, you saw the human race successful, spread out over the stars. We had starships. We had friends. We also had people who didn't like us, but they didn't like it. They didn't get along with anybody. The Romulans, the Klingons, they didn't even get along with each other. And so I truly believe we're going to be fine. We'll get through this. And once humanity figures out there's this captured technology, we're really quick learners. When we need to learn something fast, we do. And in fact, they say that we've actually mastered we reverse engineered a lot of this technology. We can build our own flying saucers now. And one of the reasons imagine we're Luxembourg in the universe. That would account for why people have left us alone, because we're some kind of neutral zone. And that means that we have friends. We have people who are just regard us as interesting. Interesting in a scientific sense. Then we have people who are reportedly look just like us out there, and they would view us as kindred. In fact, we're probably part Pleiadian. That's the one of the rumors, that they, because of shore leave in times past, we're part Pleiadian. In fact, we're their cousins basically. So they they look after us. And then of course there's these little short gray aliens, and they're the scum of the galaxy. And if they could take this place with acceptable casualties, they would have already done it. But anyone who attempts to dominate this place risks starting an interstellar war with our more powerful neighbors. So we have enemies, but we also have powerful friends, apparently. And I believe by God, guts, and guns, we will get through this period. We will be fine, and we will end up looking like Star Trek. That's what I believe with all my heart.
All right, my friend. It is always, as always, an absolute pleasure. And we'll definitely talk soon for sure.
Sure, Sean. And thank you for this great honor to be your initial guest on this show.
Yeah, thank you for joining, my friend.
To the rest of the human race, I say live long and prosper.
Goodbye, all.